great seminar because I've got two really smart people here, and don't ask me anything complicated. Seriously though, we're joined today by Giovanni Manetti, the owner of Fontodi and also the president of the Consorzio del Chianti Classico. So Giovanni, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Antonio, and hello to everyone.
And also Alessandro Masnaghetti, our cartographer extraordinaire. Any complicated questions about soils and exposures and vineyards, you can.
Hello, everybody.
You can ask Alessandro. It's always dangerous when you have two Italian guys on one of these calls, but hopefully we can we can get through to a lot of questions. But this is really going to be a very, I think, in-depth seminar. We've got a lot of things to talk about. We want to make it very interactive as always. So please give us your questions up front so we can weave them into the conversation. If we get them all at the end, it's a little harder to do that. You know, as always, these seminars are meant to bring us all together in a time when it's difficult to do that because of what's going on in the world. So hopefully this will be an hour of not having to watch the news or reading what's going on in the world. We just talk about wine and vineyards and maps and things like that. But Giovanni, why don't we start with you? First, you told me before we went on the air, it's the first time you've ridden your bicycle in 50 days. So maybe it's the beginning of another phase of this sort of COVID episode. But what's the mood like in Panzano and in your winery and your family?
You know, in the countryside, it's a privilege, you know, to live here because the work in the vineyard continued. So we were allowed, all the farmers, together with the food shops and pharmacies and banks, to continue to work. It is something great to spend your time at its best, and because nature doesn't stop. So there's a lot of work in the vineyard, and we cannot move. Before today, we cannot move from our village. So a little bit locked down. I miss Florence. I miss traveling. I miss all those things. But we can survive, no problem. And the weather was amazing in the last 2 months, so that was even more helpful to spend this time. And we spent a lot. Me and all my colleagues, we spent a lot of time in the vineyard. So I think the vineyards this year, they benefit the extra care that all the vintners gave to their vineyards. So probably 2020 is gonna become a great vintage, and that is the goal for everybody. All the vintners are reacting in a positive way, trying to do their best in the vineyard to make the best vintage of their life. That's the goal for everybody. So I think it's a positive way to react to the pandemic.
Mm. Well, that's certainly a very optimistic view, and I think everybody would love to see a fantastic vintage in 2020 all over the world, so that maybe in some years we'll have a combination of memories from this year, not just.
Only if Mother Nature cooperates. We cooperate. You know?
Mother Nature shows she's the boss. I'm curious though. You, in addition to running your estate and your family's businesses, you're also the president of the Consorzio del Chianti Classico. So from a high level, what is the sentiment right now about COVID and how is it impacting a producer's ability to sell their wines?
Yeah, the impact was great because, as I told you, as I mentioned, the costs are the same of, every year, but there is no income because, the majority of Chianti Classico wine is sold in the restaurants. And the restaurants are shut down, are closed all over the world. So it's quite tough, and we expect a support from the institutions, from the banks, and we'll see for the future. But it's a tough time, and I think that the farmers, especially the vintners, they have been quite hard by the pandemic. But we are farmers, so we are also able to resist to accidents. Think about hailstorm. Nobody has the farmers much more than in the factories. We are quite familiar with the accidents, and so we can react and think and project the future at its best. You know, I'm positive that everything will be okay in the future.
One of the things that you, as a consortium, have done over the last few years is you've introduced the Gran Selezione level of wines. How has that worked out?
The Gran Selezione has been introduced in 2014, and so the first vintage bottle was 2010. And for this reason, today I open a bottle of Vigna del Sorbo 2010. 10 years old. It's a nice time to open, I think. You know, it's in a good window 10 years after. And I think it was a great project because it is an attempt to put some order into the production. Before the introduction of Gran Selezione, you could find the best wines of the territory among, you know, the Chianti Classico regular category or Riserva or IGT, Super Tuscans or something like that. So the introduction of the Gran Selezione, everyone has the possibility to make a sort of pyramid with 3 different levels, you know. So the Chianti Classico Annata in the bottom, the Riserva in the middle, and the Gran Selezione at the very top. It was very well received by the critics, by the market, and this is becoming more and more successful. At the beginning, there were only 30 producers joining the project, but now there are 150. So even more and more vintners are supporting and are starting to make a Gran Selezione wine. So that is very good for the future. But let me say that it's a great time, for Chianti Classico region, because I see that all the vintners are committed in improving the quality. Everyone. Lots of energy, lots of investment, a lot of care in the vineyards, and improving quality in direction of authenticity and territoriality. So the goal is to make a wine more and more unique, that cannot be replicated in another part of the world. And to do this, you have to exalt, the terroir flavors, so the characteristic of your specific territory. And that is what we are trying to do. And there are 2 very positive trends in the area. One is, everyone is more and more confident in the potential for quality of Sangiovese. So they are increasing the percentage of Sangiovese in the Chianti Classico blend, reducing as much as possible international variety. And I think that is a great trend to enhance and to exalt the unicity and the authenticity and the territory flavors, terroir flavors. The other positive trend, I think, is the increase of sustainable practices, both in winemaking and wine growing. There is much more respect for nature. And if you want to transfer the territory into the bottle, first of all, respect Mother Nature. That's the key. And so there is a lot of increase in organic methods. 40% of all the Chianti Classico vineyards are already organic or biodynamic, and the result is that the wines are better quality in the sense of sense of place. So terroir flavors, more and more terroir flavors. So the average quality is growing. There is a lot of good hope for the future, and so it's a good time, despite the epidemic, despite the pandemic. But all the rest was going very good.
Well, that's a fantastic answer. I'm curious. This move towards greater Sangiovese, is this at the disciplinare level, the regulation level, or more? Are you talking about more the choices that individual wineries are making?
At the moment, it's an individual choice. So everyone is driving in that direction. We are at work at the consortio to do a couple of new projects. One is to revise the blend for the Gran Selezione, and the majority of the producers would like to have more Sangiovese into the Gran Selezione, avoiding at all the international varieties, probably leaving a little percentage of native varieties like Canaiolo and Mammolo and Foglia Tonda, just to use like salt and pepper. Because they belong to our tradition, so they are quite traditional. But the trend is to reduce or avoid at all the international varieties. That is a trend, and I think it is positive, especially for the top category of the appellation, the Gran Selezione.
So one of the things also about Gran Selezione is that it all has to be estate fruit, correct?
Absolutely estate fruit, but estate fruit is not enough, and you must choose your best grapes. So you have to imagine before the harvest, all the vintners, they walk up and down every row of their best vineyards, choosing the best grapes. And that's the mood behind the Gran Selezione. And so only estate grown or 30 months instead 24 months of aging. No, it's the mood of the vintners to do their best, to choose the best grapes from one vineyard, so as a single vineyard or for more than one selection of different vineyards to make their Gran Selezione, the best wine of their range, their production.
Well, you are, I can just tell by your light. I mean, that's not just the room light. You're in a very beautiful place that I like going to visit every year, which is I think one of the most beautiful places in the world, which is not just Florence or Chianti Classico, but it's Panzano. And I'm going to ask Alessandro Masnaghetti to explain what is so unique about this area. But it is this bowl-shaped amphitheater with some incredible wineries and vineyards. And it's one of the most evocative places in the world. And I will be one of the first people who can get on an airplane to go back because I miss it also. I miss this too. This is your olive oil, which I'm about to run out of. Because wine is born in a context and it's not just grapes. There's other things around. And Tuscany is one of the places still where a lot of these farms still produce grains, or they produce olive oil, or they produce other, in your case, animals, livestock. And that's not, in other parts of Italy or the world, this kind of cultivation is gone. So to me, going back to being in Tuscany is not just about the wine, it's about all of the history. So we're going to show you this picture now of Panzano, of the Conca d'Oro. And I'll show you how striking this is here. This is a photo that I took from Pecile, more or less. Alessandro will explain what that all means. Looking over at your estate, and if you can see over here where this cluster of trees is, down here, that is Fontodi, where these cluster of cedar trees is. I hope that's obvious, but it's sort of in the middle of the screen, slightly to the left. And then down here are your vineyards, or some of your vineyards. But Alessandro, Panzano is technically part of Greve, but what is it administratively? But what is it about this area that it gives all these amazing wines?
So it's a good question. In my opinion, first of all, there are the producers. That makes this region so unique, because we have to say that Panzano in 20, 30 years has become so important, so great, because there were people working so hard behind the wine. So this is the first answer, in my opinion. Of course, is a very special place in Chianti Classico, and not only here in the Conca d'Oro, because we are looking at Conca d'Oro. When we talk about Panzano, always we start with the Conca d'Oro area, but Panzano is not only Conca d'Oro. So this is important to keep in mind, because there are many other places, for example, the Rignana Ridge or Rampolla. Yes, of course, Rampolla is part of the Conca d'Oro, but the Cafaggio and La Massa, many other places. So what is special here in Conca d'Oro is the shape, because if you talk about La Massa, Rignana, and Cafaggio, there are ridges. Okay, so the vineyard are only more or less on the same, on only one slope, on a south-facing slope. Okay, that's great. Unfortunately, I cannot move the mouse, but you can. I always try to move the mouse, but it's not possible. Anyway, so where is the arrow? Oh, it disappeared. Okay. Anyway, there is the word Conca d'Oro. So there are two sides of the Concadoro. On the left side, you can see Santa Lucia in Faule, that means Castello di Rampolla, okay? You can see that the terrace is there. And right in front of Rampolla, you have Fontodi. And in the middle was the vineyard of Pecille. And Giovanni, could you explain something about the vineyard of Pecille?
Yeah, it's the vineyard just in the first photo that Antonio showed us. You could see even better the Pecille vineyard, but it's the vineyard just below the village, so at the top of the hill. And so the Concadoro is the valley that opens up south of the village, of Panzano village. And at the very top, there is the Pecille vineyard. That is one of the main source of Flaccianello grapes. Yeah, this vineyard.
Yeah. So this is Pecille. I took this picture from Pecille, and as you look forward,
Giovanni, as far as I remember, the original vineyard of Flaccianello at the beginning was the one in front of us in this picture, right?
Yeah, the one just below the villa, the main villa. Yeah, below the cypresses, the wood over there.
And why have you decided to choose this vineyard to produce the first vintages of Flaccianello? Because from a, we can say not a viticultural point of view, but anyway, you know, the exposure is not like Pecille. Pecille is better exposed compared, I suppose, to Flaccianello. But you choose that vineyard to make your Flaccianello. Why?
Yeah, because that was an historical vineyard, and it's something very particular. Because if you look at the light in terms of time of light, that one is one of that has a longer time of light during the day. Okay. Because on the east side there is Pieve di San Leonino, and the hill is quite curved, so the sun is rising in the morning very early, touching that vineyard, and it's very open to the west side. So the sun is at the end of the day, there is still light there. So it's something very special in that parcel, and that was an historical one. And the original name of Flaccianello is of that parcel, because it used to belong to the church, to the local church on the left side. And the monks were making their best wine there. So, it was a tradition to make great wine.
And Giovanni, what about the soil? Because people always ask about the soil, and as far as I know, the situation here is much more complicated compared to the Langhe that you know perfectly, because, our sedimentary soils, there are 4 or 5 formations, nothing more. But in a region like Panzano, I don't know how many kind of different soil you have. And what about the soil in the Concadoro?
It's something quite unique, because the 3 main soil of Chianti Classico area are Macigno, sandstone that you can find in Lamole, Radda, so along the Chianti Classico mountain chain, and then the limestone, the Alberese, that you can find both in Gaiola, in Radda, in Castellina, and in Greve too, and then the Galestro, the clay schist. And in the Concadoro there is both Galestro and Alberese, so both clay schist and limestone, and there are like layers. So they're both of them in the same place, and they, the Galestro gives to the wine a lot of richness, concentration, and the limestone, because of the calcaire that is very high in the limestone, gives the acidity and the depth. So there is a combination of the two that is something quite unique. Only in few areas in Chianti Classico, very small areas, you could find this kind of combination of the two together.
Okay, but could you? I make the comparison before with Barolo. Of course, in Barolo as well, you have many changes of soil in 100 meters, 50 meters, like that. But I suppose that in Chianti Classico, this is even more evident, to have big changes of soil in the space of 10 meters, 50 meters, something like this. So this is why, in my opinion, when we talk about Chianti Classico, the soil is not the only answer. There are so many factors that influence the wine. Do you agree with me?
I agree with you. And first of all, I strongly believe that in every corner, in every village of Chianti Classico, it's possible to make a great wine. And in every village, there is a different combination of soil composition, exposure to the sun, or altitude, or percentage of woods, and also a different culture, a different tradition, winemaking tradition or wine growing tradition. So all together makes something, a unique combination, a particular combination that gives to every village, different characters into the wine. And that's the beauty. It's a great treat for Chianti Classico.
Yes, I agree, because there was a question before. One of the first questions was about, do you think the Chianti region size is too big? I don't think so, because Bordeaux is even bigger, And I think that in this time that you are working on subzone, something like this, this is the real power of Chianti Classico, that you have, yes, it's a huge area, but you have so many differences, and this is a treasure, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and it's not so big, it's 7,000 hectares on the vines.
No, but it's 70,000 then of a surface.
Yes, but the vineyards are covering only less than 15% of the total surface, and the woods is 65. This is another very important point, because woods means biodiversity, and the biodiversity is very helpful if you want to do organic, if you want to be organic in your vineyards, because the biodiversity means that you have to consider the environment, your ecosystem as a box. So if the box is full of organisms, is full of especially microorganisms, they are all chained one by the other one, there is no space for the enemies, fungus, insects that are coming from outside. So a good biodiversity, a rich biodiversity is very important if you want to do a great organic vine growing. And this is something that you can find in Chianti Classico. You can see, all the hills behind Panzano, they are just woods, and 65% of the surface. And so it's not a monocultural area, but vineyards is only less than 15. This is much better, in my opinion.
Can I say something? I think in this world today, where every region has the same challenge, which is on-premise is gone for now. And when restaurants reopen, people estimate that the number of restaurants that will not reopen is somewhere in the 30 to 50% range. And therefore, the way forward is really finding a way to communicate to the end customer, the end consumer, who's the person who pays all of our salaries in this industry. And I can tell you, Giovanni, I know, speaking on behalf of every consumer who loves these wines, what everybody would want to see is Chianti Classico di Panzano, Chianti Classico di Greve, Chianti Classico di Radda, because this is what starts, it's what Alessandro, he's laughing because he...
No, I'm not.
but no, it's Friday and I've had a couple of glasses of wine, so, but no, seriously, because this is what creates, I think, value in places is when because what will happen is then people will want to taste those different things, and it gives birth to all sorts of events and tastings that wouldn't happen if everything is all the same. So I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I decided I wouldn't review the Krug Grand Cuvée because it was all multi-vintage. And I remember being in this meeting with Olivier Krug and Margaret Enriquez, the CEO, and I said, look, nobody can tell the difference between this Grand Cuvée and the one from 2 years ago or the one from 5 years from now. And they both said to me, consumers don't want all the detail. They can't understand the difference. They just want to know that Cru Grand Cuvée is Grand Cuvée. And I said, okay, fine, but I can't review that because there's no way for somebody who's buying this to know what it is that I'm reviewing. In a few years, then they started with these experimental names like Savoir Faire, blah, blah, blah. And then they came out with the Krug editions, the numbered editions, number 164, 165, 166. And now you know what happens? Everybody wants to taste them all side by side. And people want to see what the differences are. And maybe some are better than others. Okay, fine. But you know what? Cru Grand Cuvée now, well, I don't know in the COVID world, but until COVID, it was an allocated wine for the first time ever in its history, because there's a limited amount of each edition. Whereas when it's not differentiated, there's an unlimited amount, at least perceived as an unlimited amount. So the moment that there's Chiantis from Castelnuovo Berardenga, Chiantis from Radda, Chiantis from Castellina, Chiantis from Panzano, which should be separate from Greve, in my opinion, Chiantis from Lamole, then people are going to want to taste those differences, and that will create demand and interest in these wines that doesn't exist today. So I'm sorry to beat you up, but I just think it's important. Those geographic distinctions are so important. As Alessandro says, it's not that the place is too big, it's just maybe that there's the room to really sketch out what the differences are and to bring up to make it clear what the differences are. And I'm also tasting Vigna del Sorbo. It's 2016. I know it's too young, but it's the only one I had in the house. But, when we did the vertical of this wine, what it was like probably 10 years ago, no one really, I don't want to say that nobody cared, but this wine had a different image than it has now. And it has a different image today because you got rid of the Cabernet Sauvignon, and the wine is speaks of a vineyard, which we'll talk about in a second. And that's what people will spend for that, because that's culture and value. Whereas, when things are all the same, it's less obvious. So anyway, I'm going to pass it to Alessandro.
I agree 100% with you. And we are at work at the Consorzio, and we started a few years ago, but after my election, we are working even harder on this point, on this project. So the project is to subdivide the territory into smaller but more homogeneous areas with the name of the village. So in the future, I hope as soon as possible, especially from the Gran Selezione. So probably we are going to start from the top, especially for the Gran Selezione, for the top wine. You should read on the label together with Chianti Classico the name of the village. And so that is one of the projects for the future, for the very near future. And but I agree with you. When I'm in a wine tasting, and in every part of the world, pouring my wines all the time, and more and more people are asking me, tell me about the territory. They want to know the specific piece of land that gives birth to that wine. Nobody cares about months in barrels or days of maceration. This is not so important. The difference is made by the territory, and the wine lovers, they want to know the territory, and so we have to communicate the territory to them.
That's why I made my first map in Panzano in 2007. That's why. But Antonio, at the beginning, said something about Greve and Panzano. Could you tell us something about the history of these two villages? Why Panzano is it is part of Greve, but it's always seen as something different and tried in the past 100 years ago to be independent. Could you tell something about this story? But maybe somebody doesn't know.
No, it's a long story, but by the viticulturist, enological point of view, so Panzano has always been something different, because it's a different territory, different elevation, different soil combination, or soil composition, or exposure, or everything very different. So the wines they have a different style, a different taste. Since a long time ago, by the political point of view, Panzano is a large village. It's large, like Radda. It's the same size of Radda or Gaiole. So more than 100 years ago, they asked for the independence, but
But this was not due to the wine production. It was due to something different. Maybe.
Yeah, to something different.
Families. Why? Which was the reason?
I don't know the reason. 100 years ago is too far for me. But I think they have a different, probably even a different culture. But I'm very happy to be a part of Greve Commune. It's where I went to school in Greve. I have a lot of friends in Greve. So the mayor is one of my close friends. So. No, there is no conflict, absolutely no conflict. We are very happy to be a part of Greve, but we would like to be different in terms of wine production. It's because that is what we deserve, I think.
I don't think it's a qualitative decision at all. I mean, it's just a separation for the purposes of clear identification. It's not to say that one thing is not as good as something else. It's just a question of making it clear what Panzano means and what Greve means. As Alessandro was saying, even within Panzano, it's very complex because you have the Conca d'Oro and then the things that are further away. So, I mean, that's a lot for a consumer to, I think, for an average consumer to be able to handle. It's pretty hard. Whereas other appellations in the world, I mean, one of the things that's fascinating about Chianti Classico is how complex it is, but it's also maybe harder for somebody to grasp than, say, Yountville in Napa Valley, or the Russian River in Sonoma, or Von Romane in Burgundy, which is small. You have all of these hills. Unless you're Alessandro, you don't know where north is because it's very disorienting. And it's not so easy for the average person to mentally place where things are. I mean, if I'm standing in front of your vineyard, I can see Rampolla right in front, but that's hard. It's not obvious,
We are working on this.
But in Greve, they make beautiful wines, so elegant, more feminine probably than the Panzano ones. So the elegance, the finesse, the freshness is great there. It's beautiful. The fragrance of the fruit from in the Greve and Chianti wines is wonderful. So they have different characters, and I think there is space to make two different villages sub-appellation.
Yeah, I mean, Querciabella has nothing to do with Fontodi stylistically.
Yeah, the wines are amazing,
For example,
or Villa Calcinaia, or Castello di Verrazzano, or Vicomaggio. They are beautiful wines, beautiful.
Yes, but Giovanni, for example, you have the opportunity to produce a wine from Lamole as well. Could you tell something about the difference between the two regions that are really not so far, because it's 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, something like this?
Yeah, only 2 kilometers far, but located on the eastern part of the Greve Commune, just below the main mountain, Monte San Michele. So it's very, very high elevation, much higher than Panzano. All the vineyards are located between, around 600, 650 meters. The soil is sandstone. So in origin was a sand, and then compacted and, transformed in a rock. But the sandstone gives very fine tannins. So the wines there are lighter in color, medium body, but they have a super elegance. I like to imagine the Lamole wines like a ballerina dancing a minuetto. They're very so fine, so elegant. And I fell in love with Lamole. I always been a big supporter of Lamole wines. It's a tiny area, only 70 hectares in total. There are only 7-8 vintners, and I started a project there. The name is Filetta di Lamole. I work together with one of my cousins that owns a 7-hectare vineyards there, and we started to release the wine in 2014. But a few months ago, I acquired another property there because
Lamole.
Lamole. Yeah, 3 hectares. And I'm going to replant a part of that vineyard. So it's a project that will take a long time for me. So I'm doing that for my children, you know, because I have to rebuild all the terraces. They are all stone terraces.
In which part of Lamole? In Lamole or in Casole?
Lamole.
Lamole, okay.
Lamole. So on the other side of Fileta. But it's a beautiful place. And believe me, after the lockdown, I spent the first week, because we were really shocked, you know, by COVID-19 and the lockdown is something so, I hope Alessandro will agree with me. You know, the first week was, you know, crazy. And so every day I was, you know, waking up very early in the morning, 6 o'clock, and driving there in Lamole, and I did all the pruning and you know, curbing the canopy all by myself, and I was there with no telephone, nothing, just me and my vineyard, my new baby there. So that is how I spent the first week of lockdown. After the lockdown.
Well, that's pretty good therapy. Fantastic. So maybe we could spend a few minutes talking about your two signature wines, because I think they each have really interesting stories. You showed us first, Flaccinello started as a single vineyard wine, but now it's a blend of multiple vineyards. So what was the genesis of that wine, the birth of that wine, and tell us a little bit about its evolution.
Yeah, the first vintage of that wine was 1981. In the 70s, there was a huge crisis of the Chianti Classico appellation and the territory, because there was a huge quantity of wine produced, because in the 60s, the surface under vines increased a lot. And, but the demand was not enough for the new production. So a huge crisis. And when I started to be involved at the winery, was 1979, we found that situation. So we took the responsibility, my brother Marco and I, and we wanted to do something different from the former generation. And so we met Franco Bernabei, that is still my enologist consultant, one of my closest friends. And together, all of us very young, but we wanted to do something different. We wanted to, introduce new techniques in the vine growing, to reduce the hills, or introduce the French barriers, or something like that. And one of the main changes that we did is taking out the white grapes, because at that time the Chianti Classico blend was Sangiovese plus Canaiolo, that is a local red variety, plus 15% of white grapes, Malvasia and Trebbiano. And with that recipe, it was impossible to make an outstanding wine, because the white mast was diluting the Sangiovese mast. So first of all, we took out the white grapes from the blend, but we couldn't call it Chianti Classico, because it was not allowed. And so we decided to get out the appellation and label our best wine as a table wine. So now IGT, but at that time it was a table wine. And that was the time of the beginning of that movement, the Super Tuscan movement. It was something that was born, with the only exception of Sassicaia. All the other Super Tuscan, they were born in the Chianti Classico, because of this, quite stupid rule to blend the Sangiovese with white grapes. So they were born against the rules. It was a sort of revolutionary movement, and Piero Antinori was the first one with Tignanello, and but Sergio Manetti with Pergole Torte, and San Marco from Castello di Rampolla, Ceparello from Isola Olena, Paolo De Marchi. All of them, they were born in the Chianti Classico region. And so Flaccianello belongs to that revolutionary movement, and it is still not a Chianti Classico, but it could be a Chianti Classico. And
Gran Selezione, it could be.
It could be a Gran Selezione, but believe me, I'm thinking to go back into the appellation, and I always declared, you know, that at the end of the process of subdivision of the Chianti Classico territory in subzones, the Flaccianello will become a Chianti Classico Gran Selezione. So that is my desire, you know? And, and I have also the responsibility of as a Chianti Classico chairman. You know? So that's the goal. That's the goal. To leave to the next generation something more in order. You know? We have to solve the paradox. The Super Tuscan is still a paradox. You know, the best wines in the lowest category, something that doesn't work. You know, doesn't work, will not work for the future. So we have to do that.
And 2001 is when it went from being a single vineyard wine to a selection, right? Wasn't it 01?
Yes. 81 to 2000, single vineyard.
Okay.
And then 2001 to now is a selection of the best vineyards. And the three main sources are Il Poggio, Pescille, and a little bit in La Cappellina. So all of them located at the very top of the hill. So higher elevation and south exposure, very rocky soil. And when we make the selection for Flaccianello, we walk those vineyards looking for, you know, smaller bunches, smaller berries, in order to have, you know, to enhance the richness, but not only, even the acidity is higher than in the rest of the wines. So there's a lot of work behind that wine, and every vintage, you know, the quantity change a lot from a vintage to the other one, and there's a lot of work. And during the harvest time, I stay with my team of pickers that are all Fontodi employees all the time. I stay with them all the time in the vineyard, and we do the selection together. It's so important to do that.
So that's awesome. We've got a bunch of questions that I want to get to, but before we do, this tell us about the history of this wine. This is a single vineyard wine and still is.
Yeah, single vineyard, and the first vintage bottle was 1985, and this is the photo. It is located just below the villa, and the elevation is around 400 meters. And southwest exposure. The soil is a combination of galestro and so schist and limestone. And one of the main characteristics of this vineyard is the age of the vines. As you can see from the photo, the vines are very old. In particular, this parcel was planted in 1963, but I have another parcel planted, late 60s. So the average is, 50 plus years old. So the production per vine is very little. There is a special quality there. It's really one of the best vineyards that I have at the property. And when I started my career, and when I met Franco, the first thing that we did, that we changed, we started to pick and vinify the grapes, separately from every parcel, just to see what was the parcel that was doing better. And after a few years, we saw that Vigna del Sorbo and Vigna Flaccianello were the two parcels that were producing every year, a higher quality. And so we starting from that, we took the decision to do two different single vineyards wine.
Mm. And this wine had Cabernet Sauvignon in it for most of its life up until just a few years ago, right?
Yeah, it's at the beginning from 85 to 2011, there was a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon, something like 10%. In the last vintages, so 11, 10 and 11, the 10 that I'm drinking now, and 11, there was only 5%. And I was doing the blend just before bottling all the time. So I was saying, you know, I was thinking about this, and the wine, the Sangiovese, without the little percentage of Cabernet was so good. so in 2012, first I reduced the amount of Cabernet, and then I decided in 2012 to take it out and producing and bottling Vigna del Sorbo as 100% Sangiovese, and that will be also for the future.
That Cabernet was from Rampolla, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, I pulled the vines.
Yeah. But that, I remember with a few years we tasted the Cabernet by itself, which is from cuttings from Rampolla, which are reputed to be from Lafite.
Yeah.
And it was pretty amazing on its own, I have to say.
But I pulled the vines to don't have any temptation to go back.
Okay. That's understandable, because when a Cabernet by itself was pretty great. And I'm not exactly the biggest fan of Cabernet Sauvignon in Tuscany, but boy, it was good.
No, Pinocchio and San Marco, they're two great examples of Cabernet from Chianti Classico region. So they are just in front of Fontodi. So
yeah. Sorry, there is a question about the clones of Sangiovese. What is happening on this subject? Because there was a big project that was called Chianti Classico 2000 in the past that generated many clones. Are you working again on this subject as consortium or not?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that is one of my ideas for the future. So I would like to restart a research on that point, even if, because the former project that you are mentioning was Chianti Classico 2000 that started in 1990 and ended in 2000. And that project would use a lot of new techniques, new clones, a lot of great experiences from that. Helped all of us, all the Chianti Classico vintners, to improve their quality. So it was very, very good project. But now the scenery, the scenario is completely changed, because of global warming. So probably it's necessary now to study, to research new clones from our, complex world of clones that we have, that probably with a little longer ripening process, in order to pick the grapes a little bit later because of global warming.
This is really incredible, because this is because viticulture is something ever changing. Because at the beginning, 30 years ago, we were looking for early ripening clones, and now we are going back to late ripening clones. This is nice. I love this.
Alessandro, you know that the clone is just one part, a very little part of the portion.
Yeah.
We are quite well organized to face the global warming. The elevation, average elevation in Chianti Classico is quite high, so the nights are cool, so we don't suffer so much. And also we change our vine growing techniques. If you come in Chianti Classico, you can see that everybody now, they leave the grass, covering the soil. That is much, much better to maintain the humidity and to reduce the erosion, because when rain comes, it's much heavier than in the past. And also the temperature of the soil is lower if you keep the grass covering the soil. So we have already adjusted our machine, our car, but I think it's very important to study for the future if there is something else that we can do to reduce the impact of global warming. And the research on new clones, I think, is a part of that project, of the new project, that we would like to start as soon as possible.
So on a similar theme, a similar trend that's happened over the last 30 years, it relates to a question here from Nick, which is, back in the 80s and 90s, there was an obsession for very low yields. And today, one of the weapons that is used to sort of deal with climate change is to maybe leave a little bit more crop on the vine. Have your yields changed a lot? over the last 20 or so years also?
I believe that to make a great wines, you need a low yield. So increasing the yield, the production per vine, to reduce the impact of global warming, I'm not so sure that is a good point. Because lower yield is a good recipe to make great wines always in a dry and very hot summer, or vintages, or when it's quite rainy and wet. Think about 2017, for instance. We had a strong reduction of quantity because of the frost in April. And then the summer was so dry and hot. But the vines, they didn't stop to ripe the grapes. And the grapes at the end were perfectly fresh and not roasted because of the low quantity. It's like climbing a mountain with a light backpack, instead to have a heavy backpack. So a smaller quantity of grape per vine is good for everything. It's much better if you want to make quality. If you want to be sure to make a great quality.
That's an interesting topic, because there's obviously no. Well, that's it. It's a great. I think it's one of those questions that you could ask 10 people, you would get 10 slightly different answers. But let's we've got a few other questions to answer here. Stephen wants to know about the 2004 Flaccianello, which he's tasting in Magnum. It's very tannic, he says. What are your thoughts on the vintage?
2004?
Yeah.
2004 is it's a vintage that is going up and down, and the last bottle that I had was a couple of months ago. It was showing very well, and the tannins is the tannic structure, the firm tannic structure is one of the character of the vintage. It was a very fresh vintage, and it took a longer time to develop. So, probably in a Magnum that is a larger format, it takes even a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think what happens is that wine was probably made in a much more extracted style than today and had more oak presence. And we get used to the wines of today. And then when you go taste that wine is, when you get used to the wines of today, and then you go taste the wine from 15 years ago, not just yours, but a lot of people's, they can give that impression of tannin, because we've gotten used to wines made in a very different style all over the world, basically. So
yeah, we changed. We had a discussion last time we were here, but we are changing every year. It's a sort of fine tuning. So we are. I reintroduced the large cask, for instance, for the final part of the aging. That is much better, in my opinion. So instead to leave the wine in small barrels for 2 years, 2 full years, I prefer to reduce that time and to transfer the wine into larger cask. And at the end, the tannins are much smoother and finer, and something that I prefer. So I'm not looking for dimension now, but I'm looking for harmony, for elegance, for equilibrium. That's the goal, to make an outstanding wine.
Yeah, cool. So one of the things that a lot of people may not realize is your family has many activities, including
just two.
I don't know, the beef that you grow on your property are pretty famous around town anyway.
My toy.
Yeah.
My personal toy.
Yeah. But when I travel around the world, a lot of times I see these terracotta amphora that your family makes. So a lot of people don't know that you're one of the preeminent producers of these, and that you sell them all over the world. What is the impact? So this is a question from Thomas, which is, do you think that the use of amphora in Tuscany is going to spread because you're using it, Rampola's using it, and other people are, or is it pretty niche still as a tool?
I think at this time is a very small niche, and there's a lot of curiosity. So more and more vintners are buying even one amphora to try what is going to happen with the amphora, and it's a very interesting material. First of all, is made with galestro clay, so it's something that belongs to our territory, to our environment. And the second, the wine can breathe oxygen like in a wooden cask, but the terracotta is not giving to any flavor to the wine. So it's a neutral container. So something very interesting is using that wine. So at the end, the wine is doesn't have the spiciness, but just the fruitiness and the minerality. So the wine is very different. And I'm using in a little bit, just a little bit, even in the Flaccianello. And, 2016 has a very small percentage of same wine made from the same grape, but aged in amphora instead, French oak barrels. And it's giving like a touch of freshness, to the final blend. And I like to do that, and something that I'm continuing to do every year after 16. And we need more experience because it takes time. We make wine just once a year, so it's not like a factory. A winery is very different, but it's very interesting project, and something that belongs to the very beginning of the wine production. In Armenia or Georgia in the Caucasus, they started 6,000, 8,000 years ago making wine with the amphora. So they belong to our very deep tradition. And even in Tuscany, the Etruscans, before the Romans, so I'm talking about 2,500 years ago, they were making wine with amphoras. So it's a part of our story, and I think it's interesting to go back into the past and rediscover the good traditions.
Yeah, well, I know every time I go to a winery, people are like, come here, I want you to taste something. I want you to taste something. And it's almost always some sort of a test in an amphora. And when I look and see whose amphora it is, very often it's your amphora. So they're, as I'm sure you know, but I mean, they're being sold all over the world, and it's really neat to see this ancient vessel, as you said, made with Tuscan galestro, but it's like halfway across the ocean in some high-end, winery in Napa Valley or whatever. It's pretty neat. That must be pretty satisfying. So, well, we're almost up against our time here. I just want to thank our two panelists today. Alessandro, thanks so much. You look so relaxed. I'm just incredibly jealous.
I'm not really relaxed. Anyway.
You're like so laid back and so relaxed. I'm like, God, I need to be more like that. But thanks for being on the show with us and for sharing your maps. It's an incredible learning opportunity, a learning tool, I should say. For those of you who haven't seen them or haven't bought them, you can do that from Alessandro's site, enogea.it, if you're in Europe, or the Rare Wine Company in the US is a distributor of those maps, and they are, and the books, there's really nothing like them. I mean, you really elevated the conversations that are possible in the regions that you've mapped, and I hope that you'll map many more. And of course, Giovanni, thanks very much for your time on Friday at 6 o'clock. Look, the good side is you have a nice bottle of wine to drink tonight. Not that you're lacking in them, but thanks for opening the 2010. Thanks everyone for your questions. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Cheers.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank
Ciao.
you. Ciao.